Solarpunk has always been a fascinating genre to me. One of the reasons why is the very fact that it functions as more than a fictional or artistic genre, but instead aspires to be a movement that leads to real action in the world. It's also very attractive to me because of how it brings together two elements that are usually put in opposition to one another, nature and technology. If you're like me and you have a strong fascination with highly advanced tech in hard science fiction, you might feel a little bit guilty about it because you care about the environment and admire works that center the natural world and emphasize its beauty, then Solarpunk is the place where you can find a healthy balance between the two. I think this is one of the main reasons why a lot of people refer to the works of Hayao Miyazaki when they discuss the genre. He's one of the most well-known artists who play on this double admiration for both technology, especially aircrafts, and the environment. But surely there has to be more to Solarpunk than this nature-technology dichotomy. Over the years, there have been many attempts to properly define and shape the genre, and by looking closely at some of Miyazaki's works, we can go over its characteristics and see whether his filmography fits in any meaningful way, or if it's just another case of basing the comparisons on vibes. The first thing that we need to understand is that people probably refer to Miyazaki in relation to Solarpunk because, as of yet, there simply doesn't exist any formal example of what a Solarpunk work would look like in the first place, especially when it comes to visual narrative media like film and television. It's argued that some literary works can come close, like Norman Spiratt's Songs from the Stars, which was nominated by the person who coined the term Solarpunk. There's also Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed, and Ernest Callenbach's Ecotopia. In the realm of video games, the genre is present through games like Terra Nil and Horizon Forbidden West. There's even one game that is literally titled Solarpunk that lives up perfectly to the genre's expectations, but has yet to come out. But when it comes to movies and shows, the lack of more direct incorporations of Solarpunk leaves the viewers with few choices, and Miyazaki films are at the top of them. It's also important to note that the association of Miyazaki with Solarpunk goes beyond some general random remarks, but can actually find their traces in manifestos where Miyazaki is formally considered as an example of Solarpunk, though these associations are still challenged, as we're going to see later. The word Solarpunk was first coined in this post titled From Steampunk to Solarpunk on the blog Republic of the Bees in May 2008. The anonymous poster states that the best way to explain Solarpunk is by contrasting it to the science fiction and fantasy genre called steampunk, from which the idea of Solarpunk derives. This contrast already helps to understand Miyazaki's place in the genre. When people hear about Solarpunk, they associate the word with other science fiction subgenres that end with the word punk, mainly cyberpunk and steampunk. The distinction made between these subgenres are primarily aesthetic: steam machinery in 19th century Victorian industry for steampunk, and then cityscapes with neon lights and vibrant colors in cyberpunk. So the equivalent of that for Solarpunk in people's mind is an image of technology merging with gardens and lush vegetation and renewable energy sources like solar panels and windmills. No wonder then that films like Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind and Castle in the Sky come up a lot in discussions about Solarpunk. The connection is first and foremost aesthetic, so yes, it is based on vibes. But there is more to it than that. Because of the focus Solarpunk puts on environmentalism and the need to build a sustainable world for the future, it's understandable to associate Miyazaki's films with the genre, as he is widely known for being an eco-fantasist who incorporates ecological messages in all of his narratives. In a lot of them, environmentalism is more than just an aspect of his storytelling, but it's at the center of it. Works like Princess Mononoke and Nausicaa directly explore the devastating consequences of industrialization and the exploitation of natural resources on the environment. An even more direct exploration of this theme that people don't talk about that much is Future Boy Conan, an anime series that was later adapted into a movie, with its entire premise built around the way natural exploitation had led to literal ecological and social collapse. Even his other works that center other themes always make sure to have some place left for environmental messages. Examples of that would be Castle in the Sky, Spirited Away, and even his latest film, The Boy and the Heron. Now, it can be argued that all of Miyazaki's works have varying levels of eco-consciousness. But remember how I said at the beginning, for a work to be Solarpunk, an interaction between this ecological aspect and technological advancement should be explored at length. Because of that, the works can be narrowed down to those that represent technology more explicitly and typically lean more into the sci-fi side of things than fantasy. So moving forward, I will closely examine only 3 works: Nausicaa, Castle in the Sky, and Future Boy Conan. Now let's see how the relation between technology and nature is explored in these movies. The most in-depth exploration can be found in Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. The film is set in a post-apocalyptic world 1,000 years after a global war that caused massive environmental destruction. It follows Princess Nausicaa, who lives in the Valley of the Wind, which is situated in a toxic place resulting from the apocalypse. She attempts to promote understanding of this mysterious toxic ecosystem when a militaristic empire attempts to invade it to revive a powerful bioweapon. It becomes clear from this premise alone that the movie tries to promote a harmonious relationship between humans and nature. That is also accompanied accompanied by technology. Highly advanced tech is present throughout the film, sometimes in perfect harmony with both humans and nature. From the very beginning, we see Nausicaa using a sustainable, eco-friendly type of aircraft. The design makes it look like her and that type of technology are one. We also see her flying next to this ugly giant insect, which paints an even stronger picture of this integration. The film also seems to highlight renewable energy sources like wind power, and attempts to make this contrast between a nature-friendly type of technology and one that is destructive, mainly the rusty, dark, and giant aircrafts and weapons used by the armed forces. Castle in the Sky similarly follows a girl with a mysterious crystal amulet who is chased, along with a young boy, by some pirates and government agents who want the amulet that can grant them access to the legendary floating castle known as Laputa. Now, unlike Nausicaa, Laputa leans more into the adventure fantasy genre, but its elements of Solarpunk are mainly located in its setting, the floating island, rather than the story itself. Laputa represent this world that was once highly technologically advanced, and because it was abandoned, it was possible for nature to reclaim its territories through this massive central tree, which paints this Solarpunk image where tech is harmoniously existing alongside nature. Nothing illustrates this better than the cute robot guardians who are repurposed as gardeners, making sure to take care of the island's ecosystem. Beyond this, Laputa's city design seems to have already integrated lush greenery through its sprawling gardens, fields, and forests, with a layout wrapped around natural elements like roots, rivers, and paths. Throughout the movie, it is also suggested that the tech makes use of a form of clean and sustainable energy. We see that in the aircrafts, for example, with one design that mimics insects, illustrating a strong harmony between nature and technology. Future Boy Conan, on the other hand, is set in a post-apocalyptic world that witnessed a devastating war using some highly advanced weaponry, which led to massive earthquakes and tsunamis throwing Earth off its axis and sinking entire continents. Just like Laputa, we follow two kids who are chased by this industrial community that wants to make the girl, Lana, lead them to her grandfather who has the secret of the lost solar energy. This last aspect perhaps makes the anime the strongest case for Miyazaki's Solarpunk. Solar power technology is at its heart, representing both the potential for clean energy and the dangers of abusing advanced tech. Like Laputa, it also illustrates nature's resilience, where we see natural elements reclaiming areas, with vegetation growing on crashed spaceships and new ecosystems forming. Unlike Nausicaa, the show relies on contrast, portraying Industria, a dystopian, highly industrialized society struggling to maintain its technological way of life against High Harbor, a simple society that has redeveloped in close contact with nature. Add to that, the character of Lana, just like Nausicaa, has the ability to connect with natural creatures, in this case birds, symbolizing a deep connection with nature. So far, we have established that these Miyazaki works live up to Solarpunk through their settings that visually merge natural elements with highly advanced technology, their main characters that share a deep appreciation and connection for the environment, and what looks like sustainable tech, mainly aircrafts, that also tends to coexist harmoniously with nature. But is that enough to consider them Solarpunk? What we should look at next is how these works align with the punk aspect of Solarpunk. The 2019 Solarpunk Manifesto by the Spanish group Redes lists a set of characteristics that define the genre. Among them, we find that the punk in Solarpunk is about rebellion, counterculture, post-capitalism, decolonialism, and enthusiasm. It is about going in a different direction than the mainstream, which is increasingly going in a scary direction. On this front, Miyazaki's works seem to fit to a great extent. On the one hand, all of the three works examined here represent some form of a challenge against oppressive regimes. Nausicaa resists militaristic empires, Laputa's main characters fight against colonialist exploitation of technology, and the protagonist of Future Boy Conan, arguably Miyazaki's strongest anti-capitalist anime, work hard to overthrow the technocratic industria. This resistance to centralized exploitative power reflects the punk ethos of rebellion to an extent. And then there is also this emphasis on grassroots collaboration and community resilience, especially in Conan, where war survivors rebuild through their mutual aid, while Nausicaa and Laputa clearly prioritize collective well-being over individual or imperial gain. So it kind of checks out and makes perfect sense considering these works were made when Miyazaki was still a Marxist, before he later decided to abandon politics altogether and claimed that Marxism was a mistake. A look into all the texts that try to define Solarpunk will quickly bring your attention to another element that strongly distinguishes the genre, especially from the other punks, and that's its huge emphasis on a sense of hope. The same 2019 manifesto has that as its very first characteristic. We're Solarpunks because the only other options are denial or despair. If we go back to earlier texts like the 2014 Notes Towards a Manifesto, we find the same emphasis, as it says, "We are Solarpunks because optimism has been taken away from us, and we are trying to take it back." There remains no doubt then that, unlike other speculative genres like cyberpunk that envision dark and dystopian futures, hope and optimism are core tenets of Solarpunk. So are they present in Miyazaki's work? To a large extent, yes. Miyazaki's films all embody a deeply hopeful worldview, even if they start from a point of despair and destruction. After all, Solarpunk also operates by taking our world as it is today, which is basically miserable and under the threat of serious ecological destruction, and offers an optimistic pathway that goes from there. So, for one, all three works are centered around protagonists who embody hope and a commitment to doing what's right. Nausicaa, Shira, Conan, and Lana are all driven by a belief in the possibility of a better world, even in the face of overwhelming challenges. This sense of hope goes beyond individual characters and reaches the environment itself through ecological healing and renewal that we see in the toxic jungle that is revealed to be purifying the planet in Nausicaa, in nature's ability to grow and thrive even in the highly advanced world of Laputa, and in Conan's character's ability to survive relying on low-tech and sustainable practices even in the aftermath of ecological disaster. This also shows some hope regarding the community's ability to rebuild and overcome systemic hardships. Overall, it is safe to say that these works are marked by a rejection of nihilism that can emerge in such bleak settings, which makes them feel like a breath of fresh air, just like Solarpunk. But is that enough to live up to the genre's optimism? Well, not exactly. See, there is no doubt that, in principle, Miyazaki films are committed to embodying an optimistic worldview, but it doesn't go further than just that, a principle and a view. The reality is, Solarpunk is more about a fully fledged vision, a pathway that we can practically look up to when we think about the future. Miyazaki is more focused on the challenges themselves, giving us some principles we need to adapt to overcome them. It isn't that invested in the future or what it should look like. There's this post by St. Andrew, also known as Andrewism on YouTube, and it captures Miyazaki's alignment with Solarpunk when it lists some of its core tenets. Solarpunk is a shining vision of a positive future, grounded in our existing world, that emphasizes the need for environmental sustainability, self-governance, and social justice. Check. It's a movement dedicated to human-centric and ecocentric ends. Check. It looks beyond the limitations of capitalism and beyond the current rift between humanity and nature. Check. It's a futurism that focuses on what we should hope for rather than on what to avoid. Not check. So as you see, this is where Miyazaki diverges a little bit from Solarpunk. When it comes to optimistic futurism, he might live up to it in spirit, yes, but he lacks a solid vision that is needed for the genre to work. We see that especially in the ambiguity of his endings, where we're left with a somewhat vague vision of the future. Nausicaa ends with the premise of renewal, but it still leaves the world in a very fragile state, and we don't concretely see how it's going to be rebuilt upon this new ethos of making peace with nature. Laputa is even worse in this regard, since it ends with the destruction of the castle in the sky with no explanation as to what will replace it. And while Conan Future Boy ends with the defeat of Industria, it still leaves the work of rebuilding the world up to our imagination. Speaking of imagination, the 2008 manifesto also points to an element that distinguishes Solarpunk when it says, obviously, a major difference between Solarpunk and steampunk is that Solarpunk ideas and Solarpunk technologies need not remain imaginary, and they indulge a hope of someday living in a Solarpunk world. This is another area where Miyazaki differs, as his ideas can only remain imaginary. You can argue that his works don't directly offer a clear vision of the future, as they only gesture towards some vague idea of what the world should be like in the future. Laputa is believed to be powered by what seems to be clean energy, I guess? I'm not even sure about that, actually. But of course, it's a magical or fantastical source of power with no roots in reality, not to mention the impossibility of its design that depends on an island floating in the air. Well, fine, this is a stretch. Laputa is pure fantasy. But even in Conan and Nausicaa, while wind and solar energy are present, they still only really feature as more of a backdrop rather than anything practically inspiring. Even when it comes to the aircrafts, I doubt that any of these impressive designs would make sense from an engineering perspective. Though, we can give a little bit of credit to Nausicaa, actually, because there were at least attempts to replicate the famous glider in real life. It has its own issues and runs on conventional fuel rather than clean energy, but still shows how fiction can inspire change. If only it has a lot more commitment to techno-specificity. And for what it's worth, there were still attempts to create a version of the aircraft model that runs on electric power, so there is that. Now, you might think that this puts the movies on a pedestal and that it would be too much to ask for such commitment to inspiring ecological change from a children's movie, but that is simply what Solarpunk is, or what it at least aspires to be. Otherwise, it wouldn't be distinguishable from any other merely eco-conscious or utopian works. It's understandable, though, why Miyazaki doesn't fully live up to its ideals, considering how he simply didn't have the same objectives in mind when making the movies, nor does he share the same ideals as Solarpunks when it comes to building a better world. That being said, though, there is no wonder Miyazaki still gets associated with the genre when his works do check a lot of boxes and meet many characteristics of Solarpunk, as we've seen in this video. It's a little bit deeper than just vibes, it turns out. And I think that until we get some films and shows that aim to neatly meet the expectations of Solarpunk, it's safe to say that Miyazaki's filmography will remain the closest example we have of what the genre might look like in visual narrative media.